just was always a wild, loose kid in my neighborhood. I just always went for mine. I maintained myself. I knew how to hustle, and I definitely wasn't no punk.
These little running around like I was brought up. I brought up toting slammers. Like, so my belt had to be extra tight.
The distinction between true street respect and hip-hop fame has always been quite narrow. And one crazy evening in New York, Jim Jones was forced to feel exactly where that line stood by Rod Diggs. This wasn't a fan-made tale or an internet myth. Every block, every barbershop, and every corner where people quarrel about who is truly revered in this community was affected by this kind of moment. Jim Jones was the happiest person alive. The city was under Dipset's control. Balin was all over the place. He was also moving like a member of the Harlem nobility. However, Brooklyn doesn't submit to anyone. Rod Diggs came into play at that point. Even before the industry recognized who he was, his name was already well known. Rod was more than simply a rapper back then. He was revered throughout the boroughs for his demeanor, making him a street legend. Whether he was an ex-con or not, he was known for his power, organization, and genuine loyalty. Voices were quiet as Rod Diggs was brought up. He had supporters, and he truly adhered to the code that most people just discuss. Therefore, it wasn't lost on anyone, especially Rod. When Jim Jones began to move and talk boldly while sliding through Brooklyn with that Harlem vigor, everyone in the vicinity sensed that something was about to happen that evening. Everything happened at a crowded club in Brooklyn. It's one of those glitzy industry Met Street events when actual people and celebrities congregate under one roof. Jim Jones got out of Brooklyn's Gowanus homes, one of those places where you either learn how to survive or fall behind. Very quickly. Long before Rod touched the microphone, his name was already well known. He had a strong reputation in the community by the time he began rapping. They were aware not to put him to the test. People didn't just listen to him when he spoke because he had good rhymes. He meant every word, so they paid attention. He was an advocate of the traditional New York code, which was based on structure, loyalty, and respect. When celebrities started controlling the game, the city began to lose. Therefore, it was more than just two artists running into each other when Rod Diggs and Jim Jones eventually met. It was the collision of two worlds. Brooklyn discipline versus the Harlem flash. Jim had the intensity of a Dipset. Bright, self-assured, and loud. Rod, however, was BrooklynRaw.com determined. And devoid of false grins, Brooklyn's respect game was superior to all that Harlem shine that evening. In actuality, Rod had no intention of inciting conflict. He was establishing the mood. Word got out that Jim's group had treated the locals disrespectfully by throwing money and acting as though they owned the place. Rod arrived to clarify one issue. It's not your block. I own this. Everyone in the club realized what true presence looked like at that precise moment. Everyone who saw the interaction reported the same account, which caused it to spread like wildfire throughout the city. Rod Diggs made no threats, no yells, and no flexes. He simply calmly examined Jim in front of everyone. And it became legendary because of that serene certainty. He was able to take control of the room without raising his voice. His quiet told it all. After that, people claimed Jim's entire vibe changed. The swagger became less forceful. The conversation in Harlem subsided. He was fully aware of the type of room he was in. Pure supremacy by presence, no fists. No mayhem. That evening became legendary on the streets. Even for a brief moment, Brooklyn humbled Harlem that night. Whispers began to spread across boroughs after that. Rod Diggs put pressure on Jim. In Brooklyn, he gave in. The narrative endured whether or not people embellished it. And once a story like that is associated with your name in New York, it endures forever. It is incorporated into your legacy, whether or not you find it appealing. People continued to discuss that club night years after Rod Diggs became embroiled in that serious federal case and was sentenced to life in prison. It was evidence of his true identity. They would claim Rod was crazy, but he maintained his composure in the face of adversity. That moment was incorporated into his mythos. On that day, he reminded the entire industry that celebrity has its boundaries and that certain boundaries in the city are just uncrossable. That night was a major wake-up call for Jim Jones. Jim has always had a strong work ethic, bold, self-assured, and proud of his origins. However, even he was unable to overlook the damage that incident caused to his reputation on the streets. Without a doubt, Harlem continued to strongly support him. However, the whisper began whenever he spoke harshly about being outside in interviews or drop bars once he left his comfort zone. Online commenters would ask questions like, "But what about Rod Diggs?" And he was glued to that question. It became the tale that people couldn't stop thinking about. Jim never talked about the wild portion. Not a single word. He did not affirm or refute it. Furthermore, the silence was more powerful than any words. Because, let's face it, someone with Jim's pride would have quickly put an end to that conversation if it weren't true. Rather, he remained silent. Perhaps the realization that some stories simply don't need to be told again. Behind the scenes, people close to Jim claimed the night significantly changed the way he moved. He began rolling lighter at Brooklyn events after that, focused more on business moves and music and less on glitz and entourage. It seems as though Rod's composed check turned into a pivotal moment. A silent reminder that respect still governs every block and that fame doesn't negate repercussions. Rod Diggs' name continued to rise in the meanwhile. He came to represent that authentic New York spirit even when he was incarcerated. The streets that want integrity rather than fame. Artists began mentioning him in songs, and people who truly knew him talked about how strong he was when given the proper treatment. However, if you didn't arrive right, the tone may quickly shift. Rod's legend evolved into something more profound, evidence that respect will always prevail over celebrity in this city. Rod Diggs stood out from everyone else because of that delicate balance between respect and fear. This narrative consistently reappeared when documentaries and interviews about old New York were released. Jim Jones was humbled by Rod Diggs that evening, and it wasn't because of animosity or ego. Rather, it was because it revealed something genuine. How pride can be curbed the instant it ventures beyond its comfort zone. For supporters, this wasn't merely rumors on the street. It struck more deeply. Everyone was reminded that you can't hire the streets for the night. You are a part of them. And even today, years later, that one tale about who is truly solid continues to circulate around every barbershop, podcast, and late-night duo. The story has been stretched according to some. Others claim to have witnessed it firsthand. However, one thing remains constant: the message. No matter how big you get, there will always be someone quieter, more genuine, and willing to test your energy if you ever lose sight of your origins. Hip-hop folklore in New York grew to include that night. Rod Diggs served as a reminder to everyone that fame does not make the streets bend. It has nothing to do with trying to shame anyone or gain influence. It had to do with principle. Rod didn't approach Jim out of animosity. He took this action to preserve the code. Because respect was always more important than reputation in his culture. Always. And a whole new generation needed to see that for themselves. It wasn't a complete loss for Jim. It served as a real-life lesson. From that point on, he matured and became more focused on business, family, and legacy. A more measured, mature, and grounded version began to take the place of the wild, impetuous Jim. However, one thing about New York is that neither the fans nor the streets ever forget. That night continues to reverberate as evidence that while fame may shine brightly in this city, respect endures forever. Every city has a street legend of its own. That one tale that endures forever. However, this one just so happened to involve two names that would reverberate for decades: Jim Jones and Rod Diggs. The city would never forget the collision of two distinct worlds and energies. Rod left behind a difficult legacy. Some recall him as a rapper who never reached his full potential. He is regarded by some as the last member of a unique breed. A man who, although being incarcerated, lived by loyalty, respect, and courage. Whether you respected him or dreaded him, one thing was certain, which is why his name is still invoked with weight. Rod represented something genuine. This story's lesson is that while you can purchase jewelry, vehicles, expensive clothing, fame, and fans, you cannot purchase respect. When pride meets presence, that kind of respect is gained in quiet spaces where no one is filming. That's what distinguishes an image from identity. And it was aptly demonstrated that evening in Brooklyn. Rod Diggs wasn't there to brag. He arrived to remind everyone's definition of genuineness. That being said, the incident in which Rod Diggs humbled Jim Jones was more than just an internet rumor. It was a moment that separated foundation from celebrity. Brooklyn had the code, but Harlem might have had the flashlights. And the city witnessed who left the collision with their respect intact. Because one rule is always the same in this game, regardless of whether you're a boss, a warrior, or a rapper, real cannot be faked. And Rod Diggs proved it that evening without the need for a crowd or a headline. He was just standing there. For this reason, the tale is still told today. It was about what occurs when real recognizes real and the entire city feels it. Not because it was about Jim Jones or Rod Diggs. It was never about celebrity alone. It focused on what transpires when an image and reality collide. A man can become so elevated by fame that he loses sight of his feet. However, the streets will constantly serve as a reminder of your current situation. Rod Diggs demonstrated his identity without the need for viral moments, diamond chain swings, or flashing cameras. It was clear from his presence. You could sense his presence in a room before he said anything. He didn't make a fuss or raise his voice. He simply reminded the man by staring him in the eyes. Respect is more important than celebrity. The younger generation consistently lacks that aspect. It doesn't matter who is trending this week or who is the loudest online. When the lights go out and the crowd is silent, it's about who is still standing tall. That evening served as a wake-up call for Jim Jones, a moment that reduced everything to what is really important. You can have all the attention in the world, the money, and the celebrity. However, there is only one coin that matters when you enter another man's world. Be respectful. Everyone in attendance discovered the true meaning of that word during that Brooklyn moment. Jim Jones had to learn that lesson the hard way. And whether or not he talks about it, that incident will always be a part of his narrative. Silence isn't always a sign of weakness. It's a nonverbal way of accepting the truth. Even though Rod Diggs is currently incarcerated, his fame continues to reverberate across the community. People still talk about how he held him firm and unwavering and how his name is still respected when it crosses boundaries. Rod embodied the authentic New York vibe, the kind that existed before clout. When your actions, not your number of followers, shaped your reputation. You may disagree with every action he took, but one thing is certain. Rod Diggs was a principled person. In the modern game, when loyalty and honor are occasionally exchanged for likes and trends, its code of conduct is rapidly disappearing. To be clear, though, the purpose of this story is not to exalt the streets. It serves as a reminder of the foundation of hip-hop and the hustle: discipline, loyalty, and honesty. The same values that distinguish the genuine from the imposters? Rappers always preach about respect, but few know what it takes to earn it. And for that reason, this tale is eternal. It's more than simply a headline. It serves as a warning about what happens when celebrity loses sight of its roots. What do you think then? Did Rod Diggs truly remind the game of what it means to be authentic? Or do tales like these get more complex over time? Leave a comment with your ideas. Remember to share, like, and subscribe.